جمال الوجود بذكر الإله.
So our next speaker for the next 30-minute session is Dr. Nadeem Memon. Dr. Nadeem is an associate professor at the Center for Islamic Thought and Education, CITE, at University of South Australia. At CITE, Nadeem serves as a curriculum advisor for the Graduate Certificate in Education, Islamic Education, the first online graduate education program for educators in Islamic schools globally. His research focuses on teacher education with particular emphasis on Islamic pedagogy, comparative faith-based schooling, philosophy of religious education, and culturally responsive pedagogy. Jazakallah khair. Dr. Nadeem, please, over to you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulihil Kareem. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, I'm going to speak for a few minutes about an Islamically grounded teacher education program, which is going to really build on the work that Farah has just mentioned. Farah and I have been working very closely together for the past 15 years, I think, maybe 20, 15. And Brother Dylan and myself are both part of the Center for Islamic Thought and Education at the University of South Australia, same center that Professor Muhammad Abdullah, our keynote speaker, spoke from. So I'll speak a little bit about the work we've been doing in the teacher education space. A lot of it will be will resonate with what you just heard from Dr. Farah. But I'll share the journey of what we've learned over the past 10 years, in particular in Australia. And I'll share how we've designed the program and what we've taken from the journey that teachers who are in the program have experienced. So I'd like to start by giving an acknowledgement that this paper that I'm going to share is a paper that myself, Professor Muhammad Abdullah, and Brother Dylan Chown recently published. It's freely accessible online, so you can use the QR code to download it. I'll put it at the end of the presentation as well, so if you miss it right now. The paper is called Laying the Foundations for Islamic Teacher Education. And again, it captures the journey that we feel educators in Australia have been, the way we've designed the program and what they've been going through. So to start, I'll start with the problem that I feel that many of us who are working in the field of Islamic schooling and grappling with the teacher education space are experiencing. Imagine a Muslim educator in an Islamic school, all of whom, as Zahra al-Zira wrote so beautifully about, walk in with these beautiful intentions, this high aspiration to be part of an Islamic school that's going to be transformative, that's going to do the work of tarbiyah that Professor Muhammad spoke about, that's embedded in tajdeed and ihsan and all of these beautiful ideas about education. And then they're faced with what Stephen Ball talks about called the global education ink, or the pressures of standardization, the pressures of performativity, the pressures of ticking boxes and making sure that we're teaching to the test. So you come in with this beautiful intention as an Islamic school educator, wanting to transform souls, wanting to be that murabbi, and then you realize very quickly the realities in an Islamic school, like any other school, has to, because of parent pressure, we want to make sure our students become doctors and lawyers and engineers. What was the term I heard recently? It's either a doctor, lawyer, or a failure. It's, you know, and it's unfortunate, but it's the realities of the pressure that we don't just put on our students, but that we put on the teachers to ensure that this is the type of education they're receiving. So you end up having a teacher who ends up realizing something that Sayyid Ali Ashraf wrote about in the 1980s. I mean, when we talk about the first World Conference on Islamic Schooling, this is nothing new. They talked about the idea that teaching and learning remains bifurcated, separated, divided. The idea that we have these lofty intentions and the realities of the challenges that we face within the education system that Professor Muhammad spoke about this morning. So you have teachers that look like this because they don't know how to proceed. This struggle is not a struggle that is just us as a community. This is a struggle that many educators feel about. Stephen Ball wrote that this is the struggle over a teacher's soul. The dominant educational reform process generally is that these are not simply changes in the way that we do things or get things done. They change what it means to be educated, what it means to teach and learn, what it means to be a teacher. They don't just change what we do, they also change who we are and how we think about what we do, how we relate to one another, how we decide what is important, what is acceptable, what is tolerable. So it changes the system. It changes our own aspirations as educators, and it creates a sense of confusion for educators. Another study talked about how teachers are now becoming like machines that function like technicians. Returning to contemporary teacher education debates, broadly among the criticisms leveled in the missing ontological domain. Again, this is not for just Islamic schools. There are educators globally that are lamenting, fighting against the movement toward a technicized education, where teachers are human beings, where we don't recognize that teachers are human beings in the process of becoming. This includes being open to the essential question of who is the self that teaches, and a willingness for deeper inward inquiry into the inner terrain of the teaching self. People like Dr. Farah and myself, and I'm sure many of you have been working in the space of teacher education, and we realize that we're losing that ability to ask those deeper questions in teacher education. We're losing that ability to connect with teachers at a deep level about what education is. So what is it that makes teacher education Islamic? We are often asked this question. I mean, isn't teacher education just teacher education? I mean, isn't just good practice good practice? In the Islamic worldview, teacher education transcends mere information dissemination, which we all know. Rather, it aims at transforming the teacher and the learner at once through incorporating spiritual, moral, intellectual dimensions rooted in Islamic principles, values, and philosophy. The key here that I've highlighted for you is that it transforms the teacher and the learner at once. How often do we not look at teacher education as a transformative experience? We often think of teacher education as a degree, as a credential, something that will allow me a license to teach in a school so that I get a decent salary. Necessary, but teacher education should also be transformative, first and foremost. So Islamically grounded teacher education, I should mention, is not new. Again, 1977, you can't see it here, but one of the books that was published out of the 1977, the earliest conferences on Islamic schooling, one of them was on Islamic education, one of them was on teacher education. The Clare Muhammad schools in the United States had a teacher college called the Muslim Teachers College in the 1980s. And so this is not new, it's been something that we've been deliberating over. But what we mean by Islamically grounded teacher education is that we're not reviving practices of old, as Professor Muhammad spoke about this morning, but we're talking about a distinct philosophical commitment that foregrounds our sense of epistemic confidence, that we know that this is how we teach and this is why we believe it. Now, I should also mention very quickly that when we talk about teacher education, we're not talking about, they're not all the same. There's many different programs in teacher education, and in the paper we speak about different types of programs. There are some teacher education programs that prepare teachers to teach Islam. So teach teachers who are teaching Islamic studies. That's one way of looking at it. There's teaching credentials for Islamic studies teachers, so getting a Bachelor of Education or a Master's of Teaching for somebody that doesn't have one. That's another way of doing it. There's teacher education that focuses on adding Islamic perspective to the curriculum, which also exists. What we're speaking about is restructuring the teacher education program from ground up, from within an Islamic paradigm. So we're talking about an entire overhaul of the teacher education program. That doesn't make one a right or wrong, don't get me wrong. All I'm saying is there's different types. And the one type that we're speaking about, I think here, is one that is restructuring teacher education from within the Islamic paradigm, ground up. Now, the Center for Islamic Thought and Education, as was mentioned, we're in South Australia. It's a research center focused on education within the Islamic tradition. I'll go over it very quickly, but we do research, we do teaching, as I'll speak about in a minute, through teacher education, and we do school-university partnerships, which we'll speak about another time. Our vision is for Islamic educational thought to play a pivotal role in addressing contemporary challenges in Islamic schooling, with a mission to serve as a global hub which aspires to renew Islamic schooling by bridging the gap between research and practice. And I'll speak about what I mean by that. One of the core things that we do is we offer this teacher education program. This teacher education program is a graduate certificate in Islamic education. It is not a program in Islamic studies. And I can't say that enough. I'm not an Islamic studies scholar. I don't think Dylan would say he's an Islamic studies scholar. We are academics that work in the field of education. This is a program in education, but education within the Islamic tradition. So I think that's an important point to make. If teachers come to our program and don't have a background in Islam or feel like they need to learn more about Islam, there's plenty of places for them to get that. What we're offering, and I think what Farah offers as well, is something that is more in terms of educational studies. We speak about Islamic pedagogy as the study of education from within Islamic conceptions of education. So we've spoken about that, but essentially ideas, concepts like tarbiyah, and there's many others, that define what we think about in terms of education. Now the end goal for our program, people say, well, often, what's the journey? Where is this program going to take me? The end goal of this teacher education is something that we call faithful praxis. Faithful praxis is an integration of our faith-informed principles and our classroom practice, also understood as a process of theory enacted, embodied, and realized. Going back to that initial problem that I shared of the teacher who was, sort of split, imagine a teacher whose mindset is not split. Essentially, they know what they believe about in education. They know what a real education should look like, but they can't actually do it. That's the opposite of faithful praxis. What faithful praxis is somebody who says, I believe that a learner should have a sense of holistic growth, and my school actually allows me to do it. That's faithful praxis. So very quickly, I'm probably running out of time, but I'm going to speak about what we've learned over the last couple of years of working with, I think, over 100 educators. Over 150 educators have taken our program or are in our program currently across Australia. And I think the way that we've sort of articulated it is that our program goes through 5 key turns. And these 5 key turns they're not in sequence, but they're like concentric circles at the same time. They are an inward turn, a critical turn, a reflexive turn, a turn back, and then a pedagogical turn. This is the design of a program, and hopefully for those of you that are doing teacher education work in your own schools or communities, this might be of benefit. An inward turn is a compelling pedagogical challenge. It's a turn inward to me as somebody who has 25, 30 years of teaching experience in the classroom. I've been doing this all my life, and you say, but there's got to still be a reason why I feel like something's not right, something doesn't fit. That's my pedagogical challenge in my context, in my school, in my classroom. And it's also about a complex knowledge entanglement of what is it between what I believe and what I believe about education, what I believe in terms of in my understanding of Islam, and the context in which I'm teaching. And it's not an outward look, but it's an inward. So it's not outward. Oftentimes we work with educators and they say, you know what, it's the parents that are the problem. If the parents just educated these children better, if they reinforce what we do in the school, everything would be fixed. Oh, it's the curriculum problem. Oh, it's the this problem, or it's the that problem. And it's always somebody else that's the problem. And the inward turn gets teachers in our program to first look at themselves and to say, how do we turn inward to ask ourselves, what could I as an educator be doing differently in order to achieve the aspirations of this deep sense of Islamic pedagogy? The second is a critical turn. And as Dr. Farah mentioned earlier, it's about recognizing, I think Professor Muhammad mentioned this as well, it's about recognizing first and foremost that education and schooling are not neutral. Can't say that enough. Education and schooling are not neutral. The way we do things, the way we do schooling, has a underlying worldview, and it's not neutral. And therefore, we need to challenge the neoliberal logics of the way schooling happens. We need to challenge why we give homework, why we sit in groups, why we say that the 4 C's are, collaboration, critical thinking, and so on. We have to question these things. Where are they coming from? Not to say that they're all bad, just question where they're coming from. That's all. We're not saying that you throw it all out, but we should at least know where it's coming from. So challenge the neoliberal logics, and the decoloniality reminds us that what we've lost. So there has to be a critical look at the field of education. Then comes the reflexive turn, which is that the reflexive turn is probably a difficult moment for many teachers, because they realize that the solution is not going to be prepackaged. In our teacher education program, we emphasize we're not going to give you the top, as Farah said, we're not going to give you, here's the 10 strategies for tarbiyah, go do them. It's not a package, it's not best practices, and it's not what works. It's, the principles and what defines good education from an Islamic perspective. Now, how do I make sense of that in my own schooling context, in my own classroom context? So what the reflexive turn does is it helps teachers realize that we are the experts of our own context, and that the solution or the tajdeed is actually going to come from within. Then comes a turn back. Now, we know that in the Islamic tradition, progress is not necessarily a forward motion, but it's actually a turn back. It's a reclaiming of what's lost. It's a going back to our sense of fitrah, back to higher purpose and back to worldview, which establishes the common language and the conceptual depth that was mentioned in the earlier sessions. And lastly, it's a pedagogical turn, and this is probably where it really rubber hits the road for us. They say, okay, so then where's the curriculum? And in our teacher education programs, we emphasize that we want educators to lead pedagogically. Why? Because pedagogy, the way we teach, is something that you have control over today. And you can walk into the classroom tomorrow and be a different teacher. But if we keep lamenting that we're waiting for that perfect curriculum to descend, we might be waiting for a long time. So leading pedagogically helps us realize that pedagogy is how we're going to transform hearts. And if the focus of an Islamic education, as Professor Muhammad said earlier, is ma'rifah, then the question is, how can we do that today and not have to wait? And this can be achieved through, and we focus a lot on action research. Very quickly, that's the 5 steps, but let me just tell you what we've learned. What we've learned is that the inward turn is where shared aspirations are fostered. I'm not sure if this is like for many other contexts, but a lot of times our Islamic schools are like competitors. The school down the street, we want to make sure that they don't meet our teachers, because if they meet our teachers, they'll take our teachers. When we have this collective inward turn, what often happens is we begin to realize that we're actually in this together. We have a shared concern, a shared aspiration, and this camaraderie begins to become fostered because we start to realize that we're in this deeply together. The critical turn, what we've learned is that this is the moment where educators realize that we actually have allies, that we're not the only ones that are critical of our system. There's an entire group of educators broadly in the field of education that are equally critical of the system in which we are in. And we start to realize if we build on that archive, if we build on those academics, those thinkers, those educators, we can start to realize that when we talk about wanting to do tajdeed, we're not the only ones trying to renew the field of education. We're the only ones maybe wanting to do it from our particular orientation or our particular worldview, but we are on the same page in terms of recognizing that something needs to change. What we've realized with the reflexive turn is that it's initially, the reflexive turn makes some people feel like deflated because they say to themselves, I thought you were going to give us a solution. But the reflexive turn is also very empowering when teachers start to realize that the solution is actually within. That actually I have a lot to give in this classroom and I have a lot of experience. And it's empowering for teachers to know that I'm not coming to a teacher education program and this teacher education program is going to solve my problem, but I'm coming to a teacher education program that's going to remind me that all of my experience is actually quite valuable. The turn back, what we've learned is when you go back to the Islamic tradition, you can't do it too early. A lot of times people say to us, can you just tell us, give us the, what does Islam say about education? Tell us about what Islam, the Islamic perspective on these different concepts and how this is going to shape. If you don't do the first three moves, the first three turns of the inward turn, the critical turn, and the reflexive turn, and you jump right back into Islamic tradition too quickly, we go on the assumption of that we get it. And we start to implement, what often happens is we start to append Islam on again. So people will say, for example, so what does tarbiyah mean? Tarbiyah means, what is halakha? Halakha is this, okay, next day everybody's doing a halakha. Isn't it true? Yeah. Everyone's doing a halakha suddenly, but they miss the essence of the halakha. So you don't want to do the turn back too quickly. And the last one is that Islamically grounded, vision-driven context renewal is where this becomes real, because people now have a framework of thinking about what each of these different elements mean. So inshallah, hopefully that was a snapshot of our program and what we've learned from the program. Again, for those of you that may have just walked in, the paper that we've worked on, Brother Dylan, myself, and Professor Muhammad Abdullah, is called Laying Foundations for Islamic Teacher Education, and the QR code will get you free access to the paper to download.
سعد إلى منتهى